The listening post floated in the dark like a forgotten nail driven into the edge of nowhere. It was a small thing, barely bigger than a cargo shuttle, bolted together with old steel and older hopes. Its name was Outreach 7, and it sat at the farthest point humanity had ever placed a permanent structure. Beyond it, there was nothing claimed, nothing mapped, nothing known, just the black between stars stretching out forever. Outreach 7 had been listening for 41 years. 41 years of silence, 41 years of recording the hiss and pop of dying stars, the low groan of pulsars and the empty static of a universe that did not seem to care that humanity existed. The three-person crew rotated every 8 months, and most of them described the posting the same way: boring, lonely, and pointless. A senior technician, Harayun, had been on the station for 5 months. She was a quiet woman with short gray hair and hands that were always busy. She fixed things that did not need fixing just to keep herself from going mad. She had stopped believing the station would ever find anything. The universe, she had decided, was either empty or too far away to matter. That changed on a Tuesday. It was the kind of change that started small: a blip on a screen, a single irregular pulse buried in the background noise of the Cygnus reach. Hera almost missed it. She had been eating noodles from a vacuum pack and watching the data scroll by with half-closed eyes when a pattern caught her attention. She put the noodles down. She leaned forward. She played the signal back. It repeated, not like a natural phenomenon. Suri, not like the echo of a collapsing star or the rhythm of a spinning neutron mass. It repeated with structure, with intention. The gaps between pulses were even. The frequency shifted in steps that followed a mathematical sequence. It was, without any room for doubt, artificial. Hora sat very still for a long time. Then she called the other 2 crew members. Then they all sat very still for a long time. Then they sent the data to Earth. The message took 11 hours to reach the nearest relay, and another 6 to bounce through the chain of quantum-linked communication hubs that connected humanity's 14-star systems. When it reached Earth, it landed on the desk of a junior communications analyst named Rowe, who read it, spilled his coffee, and ran to his supervisor. Within 3 hours, the signal had climbed the chain of command from a stained desk in a basement office all the way to the United Terran Confederacy's High Council chamber in Geneva. The High Council was a body of 12 people who governed humanity's collective interests across the stars. They were politicians, which meant they were very good at talking and very slow at deciding. But this time, even they moved quickly. The signal was analyzed, confirmed, reconfirmed, and then analyzed again. The mathematics were clear. The structure was clear. Someone out there, in the dark beyond the Cygnus reach, was broadcasting. Humanity was not alone. The news was not released to the public. The council decided that panic, excitement, or a combination of both would not help anyone. Instead, they did what governments always did. They formed a plan behind closed doors and chose the people they trusted to carry it out. The first person they called was Ambassador Idris Okafor. Okafor was 63 years old, tall, thin, and had the kind of face that made people feel like everything was going to be fine. He had spent 30 years talking to people who wanted to kill each other and convincing them not to. He had ended 2 colonial rebellions without a single shot being fired. He had brokered the Kepler Accords, which brought 3 warring human factions into a trade alliance that still held 12 years later. If there was a living human being who could talk to an alien civilization and not make things worse, it was Idris Okafor. He was sitting in his garden on New Carthage when the call came. He listened to the council's briefing, asked 7 precise questions, and then said yes. He packed a single bag. He kissed his husband goodbye. He boarded a shuttle and was off-world within 4 hours. The second person the council contacted was Admiral Lena Vasquez. Vasquez was a different kind of tool for a different kind of problem. She was 51, compact, and carried herself like a blade that had been sharpened too many times. She commanded the UTC's 4th Expeditionary Fleet, 62 warships built for deep space patrol and rapid response. She had fought in the Belt Uprising, the Proxima Insurrection, and the short, ugly war on Tannhauser Gate. She had never lost a battle and never started one. Her soldiers loved her because she brought them home alive. Her enemies feared her because she was very good at making the alternative to peace look terrible. Vasquez received her orders aboard her flagship, the heavy cruiser Ironclad, while it was docked at Titan Station near Saturn. She read the briefing twice, the first time with professional interest, the second time with something that might have been worry, though she would never have admitted it. Her orders were clear. She was to escort Ambassador Okafor to the source of the signal. She was to provide security. She was to follow Okafor's lead on all matters of contact and communication. She was to use force only as an absolute last resort. The Council wanted peace. The Council wanted a handshake across the stars. The Council wanted history to remember this moment as the day humanity made a friend. Vasquez wanted that too. But she had been a soldier long enough to know that wanting something and getting it were very different things. The mission came together quickly. Okafor was given the diplomatic cruiser Olive Branch, a sleek white vessel designed specifically for high-profile negotiations. It had luxurious meeting chambers, advanced translation systems, and absolutely no weapons. It was meant to look harmless. It was meant to say, without words, that the people inside it came in peace. Vasquez's fleet would follow at a distance, close enough to respond if something went wrong, far enough away that the aliens would not feel threatened. That was the plan, at least. They departed from Titan Station on a cold Thursday morning. The Olive Branch jumped first, its FTL drive painting a brief streak of blue light across the darkness. Vasquez's fleet followed in formation, 62 ships moving like a school of steel fish through the folded space between stars. The journey took 9 days. During those 9 days, UTC intelligence worked around the clock to decode more of the alien signal. What they found did not make anyone feel better. The signal was not a greeting, it was not a hello, or a welcome, or a curious hand reaching out to see who was there. It was a broadcast, automated, repeating, and very old. And when the linguists and mathematicians finally cracked enough of its structure to understand its meaning, the mood in the intelligence offices went from excitement to silence. It was a territorial claim, a border marker, a sign posted at the edge of someone else's yard that said, in language that needed no translation, "This space belongs to us. Stay out." The aliens called themselves the Velith. Their territory was called the Dominion of the Velith Compact, and their signal had been broadcasting for over 2,000 years, long before humanity had even left Earth's atmosphere. Okafor received this information in his quarters aboard the Olive Branch. He read the translation carefully, then read it again. Then he sat back in his chair and thought for a long time. A territorial claim was not a death sentence. Many civilizations throughout human history had posted warnings at their borders. It was a sign of strength, of identity, of a desire to be left alone. It did not necessarily mean the Velith were hostile. It meant they were cautious. It meant they had something they wanted to protect. Okafor had worked with cautious people before. Cautious people could be reasoned with. He sent a message to Admiral Vasquez outlining his assessment. The Velith were likely a powerful, established civilization. They were territorial, but not necessarily aggressive. The best approach was to announce humanity's presence openly, express peaceful intentions, and request a formal meeting. Standard first contact protocol. Slow, careful, respectful. Vasquez read his message on the bridge of the Ironclad. She respected Okafor. She respected his record, his intelligence, and his instincts. But she had spent her entire career learning one simple truth that diplomats often forgot. You could not reason with someone who did not see you as a person. And a civilization that had been broadcasting a keep-out sign for 2,000 years might not see a newcomer as anything worth reasoning with. She sent back a short reply. Understood. Will maintain escort distance. Recommend we keep weapons hot and shields at standby, just in case. Okafor agreed to the precaution. It was a reasonable compromise. On the 10th day, they reached the edge of the Velith border. The signal was strong here, pulsing through every frequency like a heartbeat. Okafor ordered the Olive Branch to broadcast a response on the same frequency, a simple mathematical greeting, followed by a message of peace translated into the signal's own structural language. It was elegant work. The linguists had spent the entire journey building it. It said, in essence, "We hear you. We come in peace. We wish to talk." Then they waited. The response came in 47 minutes. It was not words, it was not mathematics, it was a fleet. The olive branch's sensors screamed as 42 ships dropped out of FTL in a perfect ring around them. They were huge, angular, dark vessels covered in what looked like overlapping scales of black metal. Each one was at least twice the size of the olive branch. They moved with a precision that spoke of thousands of years of practice. They were warships, and they were in attack formation. Okafor stood on the bridge and watched the ring of alien vessels tighten around his ship. His heart was beating fast, but his face was calm. He had been in rooms with warlords who had guns pointed at his head. He had smiled at men who were deciding whether to kill him. Fear was something he carried in his chest and never let reach his hands. He turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel," he said. "All frequencies. You let them know we received their signal and we are here to talk. Nothing more." The officer did as she was told. The message went out. The alien ships did not move. They just hung there, dark and silent, like a ring of black teeth waiting to close. Then a transmission came through. A single voice, deep and resonant, translated through the olive branch's systems in rough, broken sentences. The translation was not perfect, but it was clear enough. "Small creature," the voice said, "you have entered the Dominion. You have not been invited. You have not been summoned. You stand in the shadow of the Violet Compact, and you will answer for your presence." Okafor straightened his jacket. He had heard worse openings. "We are the people of Earth," he said, his voice steady and warm. "We received your signal. We came not to intrude, Karin, but to introduce ourselves. We seek only peace and understanding between our peoples." There was a long silence. Then the voice came again, and this time there was something in it that Okafor did not like. It was amusement. Not the kind that came from a good joke, but the kind that came from watching something small and helpless do something foolish. "Peace," the voice repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it strange. "You speak of peace. You do not know what that word means here. In the Dominion, peace is simple. It is the silence that comes after obedience." The channel remained open. The 42 ships remained in formation, and Okafor, for the first time in his long career, felt a cold weight settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. He had heard that tone before. Not from cautious people, not from people who wanted to be left alone. He had heard it from people who believed with absolute certainty that they were better than everyone else in the room. The voice spoke again. This time it was not addressing Okafor. It was addressing its own fleet, but the channel was still open, as if the speaker did not care whether the humans heard. "Record this," the voice said. "Another species has crawled to our border and begged for our attention. We will teach them where they stand, as we have taught all the others." The transmission ended. The ring of ships began to move. Slowly, deliberately, they tightened their formation, pushing closer to the olive branch like a fist closing around a small white stone. Okafor stood on his bridge and watched them come. Behind him, his crew was afraid. When he could hear it in their breathing, see it in the way their hands gripped their consoles. They were diplomats, translators, and scholars. They were not soldiers. They had never been this close to death before. Okafor had, and he knew, with the certainty of 30 years spent reading people across tables and battlefields, that the next few hours would decide everything. Not just for his crew, not just for his mission, but for every human being alive. And he pressed his comm and sent a brief, calm message back to Admiral Vasquez, still waiting with the fleet beyond sensor range. "Admiral," he said, "I think you should start planning for the worst." Then he turned back to face the alien ships, straightened his shoulders, and prepared to do the only thing he knew how to do. He prepared to talk. He did not yet know that talking would not be enough. The Valeth were tall. That was the first thing Ambassador Idris Okafor noticed when the visual feed finally connected, and he saw them for the first time. They were tall, broad, and built like something that had evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill you, and you had decided to kill it all back. Their skin was dark gray, almost black, and had a faint metallic sheen that caught the light like polished stone. Their faces were long and angular, with deep-set eyes that glowed a dull amber, and moved with the slow, deliberate focus of predators. Their mouths were wide, lined with something between teeth and mandibles, hard ridges of bone that clicked together when they spoke. They wore armor even in what appeared to be their command chambers. Heavy plates of dark metal layered over their chests and shoulders. They did not look like creatures that took their armor off very often. They did not look like creatures that needed to. The one speaking to Okafor was their fleet commander, the Archon. His name, as best as the translation systems could manage, was Korvath Jael. He was larger than the others, with deeper lines carved into his face and a pattern of scars across his neck that looked deliberate, marks of rank or ritual. He sat in a throne-like chair at the center of his bridge, surrounded by officers who stood at rigid attention, and he looked at the human ambassador the way a man might look at an insect that had landed on his dinner plate. "You are small," Archangel said. The translation came through flat and toneless, but the contempt was clear enough. "Your ship is small. Your words are small. I have crushed species larger than yours before my morning meal." Okafor stood at the center of the olive branch's communication chamber, a wide circular room designed to project calm and openness. There were no weapons here, no guards, just Okafor, his senior translator, his aide, and a holographic projection system that displayed Jael's image at life size. The Archon towered over them, even as a hologram. "Archon Jael," Okafor said, keeping his voice level and respectful. "I appreciate your willingness to speak with us. We are new to this region of space, and we understand that our presence may be unexpected. We have come only to introduce ourselves and to explore the possibility of a peaceful relationship between our peoples." Jael stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned to one of his officers and said something in his own language. The officer made a sound that the translator struggled with before settling on the closest human equivalent. Laughter. Deep, rumbling laughter. "Peaceful relationship," Jael repeated, turning back to Okafor. The words sounded wrong in his mouth, like they were concepts he had never been asked to consider. "You do not understand where you are, small creature. Let me explain it to you, since your kind is clearly young and ignorant." He leaned forward in his throne, and the hologram shifted with him, his amber eyes boring into Okafor from across the void. "The Valeth Compact has ruled this region of the galaxy for 6,000 years. 6,000 years. Your species was still living in mud huts and hitting each other with rocks when we built our first fleet. When we have encountered 43 intelligent species since we rose to power. Do you know how many of those species are still free?" He paused, letting the silence do its work. "None," he said. "Every species we have met has bent the knee. Some did it quickly and were rewarded with the honor of serving us. Some resisted and were broken. A few refused entirely, and they no longer exist. That is the law of the Dominion. That is the only law that has ever mattered. The strong rule, the weak serve. There is nothing else." Okafor listened to every word. He did not interrupt. He did not flinch. He had heard speeches like this before, from warlords on distant colonies, from rebel leaders drunk on their own power, from petty dictators who believed their strength made them right. The words were always the same, only the scale changed. "O Archon," Okafor said when Jael had finished, "I hear what you are saying, and I respect the history of your people. 6,000 years is a long time, and the Valeth have clearly built something remarkable. But I would ask you to consider that the galaxy is large enough for more than one way of doing things. Humanity does not wish to rule you or be ruled by you. We wish to stand beside you as equals, to trade, to learn from each other, and to build something that benefits both our peoples." He paused and then added, with the faintest hint of a smile, "We are small, as you say, but we have found that small things can sometimes be surprisingly useful." Jael did not smile. The concept might not have existed in his culture. He studied Okafor with those burning amber eyes, and for a moment the ambassador thought he saw something flicker there. Curiosity, perhaps, or the faintest crack in the wall of absolute certainty. Then the crack closed. "You are amusing," Jael said. "I will give you that. Your courage is unusual for a lesser species. Most of them are already on their knees by now, weeping and begging." He straightened in his throne. "But courage does not change the facts. You have entered the Dominion without permission. You have not knelt. You have not submitted your genetic profiles for cataloging. These are offenses, and they will be answered. Okafor's translator, a young woman named Priya Sharma, leaned close to his ear. Sir, she whispered, genetic cataloging. Our intelligence briefing flagged this. It is a Valith practice where subject species provide biological samples that are used to engineer control mechanisms, chemical compliance agents tailored to a species' biology. It is, functionally, a form of genetic slavery. Okafor's expression did not change, but something hardened behind his eyes. He had been willing to be patient. He had been willing to absorb insults and condescension. He was a diplomat, and diplomats understood that pride was a luxury you could not always afford. But there were lines, and genetic slavery was a line so far beyond acceptable that it was not even visible from where he stood. Archon Jael, he said, and now his voice carried a different weight. Still calm, still measured, but with a foundation of steel beneath the warmth. I must be clear about something. My humanity will not submit to genetic cataloging. We will not kneel. These are not negotiating points. They are facts. What I am offering you is an alternative, a relationship built on mutual respect rather than dominance. I believe this would benefit the Valith as much as it would benefit humanity. The bridge of the olive branch was very quiet. Every member of the crew was watching the hologram, watching Jael's face for some sign of how the Archon would respond to the first species in 6,000 years that had said no to him while looking him in the eye. Jael's mandibles clicked together slowly. Once, twice, 3 times. It was a gesture Okafor could not read, but it made the Valith officers on the screen shift uncomfortably. You refuse, Jael said. It was not a question. I offer an alternative, Okafor corrected gently. There is no alternative. There has never been an alternative. You kneel, or you are unmade. That is the choice. That is the only choice. Then I respectfully decline both options and propose a third. Jael stared at him. The clicking of his mandibles stopped. The bridge behind him went very still. Then the Archon did something unexpected. He stood up. He was enormous. Even through the hologram, Okafor could feel the physical weight of him, the raw biological authority of a creature that had been designed by evolution and refined by technology to dominate everything around it. Jael's armor caught the light of his bridge as he stepped forward, and his voice dropped to something low and dangerous. You propose, he said, a third option. Third, let me show you what I think of your third option. He turned to one of his officers and spoke a single word. The olive branch shuddered. It was not a hit, not a direct one. It was a glancing blow, a low-yield energy weapon fired from one of the Valith destroyers at the edge of the formation. It struck the olive branch along its starboard side, shearing through the communications array, peeling back hull plating like the skin of a fruit, and venting 3 compartments to the vacuum of space. The bridge lurched. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The lights went red. Okafor was thrown sideways into the railing and felt something crack in his ribs. Priya Sharma hit the floor hard and did not get up immediately. Alarms screamed from every direction. Through the smoke and the chaos, Okafor heard the damage reports come in, and the communications array was gone. 3 compartments breached. Emergency bulkheads had sealed, but the ship was crippled. And worse, the voice of his medical officer, strained and barely controlled, reporting what Okafor had already feared. 3 crew members were dead. Ensign Torres in communications, Dr. Habib in the lower lab, and Petty Officer Kwame, who had been standing in the corridor near the breach when the hull opened up and the universe reached in and took him. 3 people. 3 human beings who had come here carrying nothing but the hope of saying hello to another civilization. Dead. Because an alien warlord wanted to make a point. Okafor pulled himself upright. His ribs screamed. There was blood on his face from a cut above his eye. The bridge was half dark, when lit only by emergency lighting and the red pulse of damage warnings. The holographic projector was still functioning somehow, and Jael's image still stood in the center of the room, watching. The Archon was smiling, or doing whatever passed for a smile among the Valith. His mandibles were spread wide, his amber eyes bright with satisfaction. That, Jael said, was a warning. The next one will not miss. You have 1 hour to transmit your genetic profiles and formally submit to the authority of the Valeth Compact. If you do not, I will destroy your ship and send the debris back to your homeworld as a message." He paused and then added with a tone of deep, genuine amusement, "You may call your elders if you wish. Perhaps they will have more sense than you." The channel closed. Jael's image disappeared. The bridge of the olive branch was left in red-lit silence, broken only by the sound of alarms and the ragged breathing of frightened people. Okafor stood in the center of his broken ship. He pressed one hand against his cracked ribs and used the other to wipe the blood from his eye. He looked at his crew, scared, hurt, angry. He looked at the empty space where Jael's hologram had stood. He looked at the damage reports scrolling across the one functioning screen and saw the names of the 3 people who had just died. He was a man who believed in words. He had built his entire life on the idea that any problem could be solved if you found the right thing to say. He had walked into rooms full of killers and walked out with peace agreements. He had turned enemies into partners and wars into handshakes. He believed, and with every fiber of his being, that talking was always better than fighting. But he was not a fool, and he knew, standing in the wreckage of his ship with the blood of his crew still warm on the deck plates, that words had reached their limit. Not because words were weak, but because the Valeth did not hear them. To the Valeth, words from a weaker species were just noise, pleasant sounds made by animals that had not yet learned their place. He needed to change the context. He needed to make the Valeth understand that humanity's words came from a place they had never encountered before. A place where peace was not a sign of weakness, but a choice made by people who had the power to choose otherwise. He turned to his operations officer, a steady young man named Chen, who was bleeding from a gash on his arm but still at his console. Chen, Okafor said, "is the backup transmitter functional?" Chen checked. "Yes, sir. Short range only, but it can reach the fleet if we boost the signal through the secondary array." "Good. Open a channel to Admiral Vasquez. Priority 1. Encrypt it with Protocol Omega." Chen's fingers moved. The transmitter hummed. A connection was established. Thin, weak, but there. "Admiral," Okafor said into the comm. His voice was calm. His words were measured, but his hands, hidden below the console, were shaking. "This is Ambassador Okafor aboard the Olive Branch. Talks have failed. The Valeth have fired on our ship. 3 of my crew are dead. They have given us 1 hour to submit to what amounts to genetic enslavement." He paused, took a breath, and then said the words that would change history. "I am invoking Protocol 7. Send everything." The line was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then Admiral Vasquez's voice came back, and it was perfectly steady, perfectly controlled, and colder than space itself. "Understood, Ambassador. Hold position. Help is coming." The line went dead. Okafor lowered his hand from the comm and turned to look through the cracked viewport of his bridge. Outside, the 42 Valeth warships sat in their ring of black metal, patient and smug, waiting for humanity to kneel. Far away on the bridge of the heavy cruiser Ironclad, Admiral Lena Vasquez turned to face her crew. Every officer on the bridge was looking at her. They had all heard the transmission. They all knew what Protocol 7 meant. Vasquez did not waste time on speeches. She had never been good at them, and there was no time for them now. Or she turned to her communications officer, a veteran named Okonkwo, and said 6 words. "Wake up the Erebus Nox." Okonkwo's eyes went wide. He had served under Vasquez for 7 years and had never seen her invoke that name. He had heard rumors about it, the way every sailor in the fleet had heard rumors. A ship so large it had been built inside a moon. A weapon so powerful it had been classified above the clearance level of most admirals. A thing that was never supposed to be used because using it meant that everything else had already failed. He entered the command codes with steady hands and sent the signal. Somewhere in a place that existed on no public star chart, something very large and very old began to wake up. Back on the Olive Branch, Ambassador Okafor stood on his broken bridge and waited. His ribs ached. Yet with the names of his dead crew burned in his mind. Through the viewport, he could see the faint glow of the Valeth flagship's engines, and he imagined Archon Jael sitting on his throne, confident and patient, waiting for the small creatures to realize they had no choice. Okafor had made a career of giving people choices. He had always believed that every conflict had a solution that did not involve bloodshed. He still believed that. But he also understood something that pure pacifists often did not. Sometimes, before you could give someone a choice, you had to make them understand that you had one too. The Valeth did not know what was coming. They had spent 6,000 years at the top of the food chain, unchallenged and unthreatened, and they had come to believe that this was the natural order of things. Inra, they believed that because they were strong, they had the right to rule. They believed that because no one had ever stopped them, no one ever could. They were about to learn something new. Okafor closed his eyes and waited. He did not pray because he was not a praying man. But he hoped. He hoped that what was coming would be enough to make the Valeth listen. And he hoped more than anything that when the dust settled, there would still be a chance for the peace he had come here to build. The hour ticked by. The Valeth waited. The olive branch drifted, broken and bleeding light into the void. And in the darkness between the stars, something was moving. Archon Korvath Jael was not a patient creature. Patience in Valeth culture, it was considered a weakness, a quality of prey animals that sat still and hoped the predator would pass them by. Jael had not become Archon by being patient. He had become Archon by being fast, ruthless, and absolutely certain of his place in the universe. But he was enjoying this. The small white ship sat in the center of his fleet like a wounded bird surrounded by wolves. And the thought of the tiny creatures inside it, scrambling around in their broken vessel, arguing and panicking, and slowly coming to terms with their new reality, gave him a satisfaction that was almost physical. He had done this 43 times before. Not him personally, his predecessors, his civilization, the long chain of Archons stretching back 6,000 years. But the pattern was always the same. First the lesser species would bluster, then they would beg, and then they would kneel, and then they would serve. It was the natural order. It was the only order. The hour was nearly up. Jael sat in his command throne and watched the sensor displays with lazy satisfaction. His officers stood at their stations in rigid silence, as was proper. The bridge of his flagship, the Dominance of Will, was a cathedral of dark metal and amber light, built to project authority in every direction. Even the air tasted of power, filtered through systems that carried trace amounts of chemical confidence markers, keeping the crew sharp and obedient. Archon, his communications officer, reported, "The human vessel has transmitted a signal. Short range, directed away from our fleet, encrypted." "A distress call," Jael said, dismissing it with a flick of his armored hand. "They are calling for their elders." "Good. Agnum, let them come. Let them see what their children have found, and let them grovel properly." He had ordered his censorships to let the transmission through deliberately. He wanted the humans to call for help. He wanted their leaders to come to the border, see the might of the Valeth fleet, and understand that resistance was a mathematical impossibility. The more humans who witnessed the submission, the smoother the transition would be. This was a lesson Jael had learned from the archives of past conquests. Break the spirit of the leadership, and the body of the civilization follows. He turned to his second-in-command, Subarshan Taeth. She was younger than him by a century, sharp-featured and careful, with the analytical mind that Jael sometimes lacked. For he valued her because she thought about things he considered beneath his attention. Things like logistics, supply chains, and the feelings of lesser species. She was soft in his opinion, but useful. "Taeth," he said, "begin preparing biological cataloging protocols for a new species. Bipedal, carbon-based, oxygen-breathing. I want the processing teams ready when their leaders arrive to submit." Taeth inclined her head. "Yes, Archon." She paused. "The signal they sent, should we attempt to decode it?" "Why? It will say what they always say. Help us. They are too strong. Come quickly." The words change from species to species, but the meaning is always the same. Fear. It is the universal language. Taeth nodded and turned to her console, but something about the situation was pulling at her in a way she could not quite name. We, the human ambassador, the tall one with the dark skin and the steady voice, had not behaved like the others. The previous species, by this point in the process, had been weeping or screaming or trying to flee. The human had stood there with blood on his face and cracked ribs and had argued. Not begged, argued, as if he genuinely believed he had the right to. It was strange. It was, if she was being honest with herself, unsettling. She pushed the thought aside and focused on her work. The Archon was right. It did not matter how the humans felt. It only mattered how strong they were, and they were not strong enough. 53 minutes into the 1-hour deadline, the sensors picked up an approaching fleet. The Valeth detection arrays were the finest in the known galaxy. They could track a shuttle across 3 star systems and identify its model from the engine signature alone. They registered the incoming human fleet with professional efficiency. 62 warships, various classes, approaching in standard formation at high FTL velocity. Estimated arrival, 12 minutes. Jael reviewed the data and allowed himself a low, rumbling sound of satisfaction. The human fleet was larger than the white ship had suggested, but it was nothing remarkable. 62 ships against his 42 might have been a concern if the ships were Valeth class. But they were not. They were small, primitive things, dangerous in the way that a swarm of insects was dangerous, but ultimately manageable. His fleet could handle them without breaking formation. "Ah, let them come," he said again, louder this time so the entire bridge could hear. "Let them see us. Let them count our ships and measure our guns and do the math. They will reach the same conclusion every other species has reached. The math does not lie." His officers murmured in agreement. The mood on the bridge was confident, almost festive. First contact with a new species was rare, only 43 in 6,000 years. And it was considered a great honor to be part of the fleet that brought a new civilization into the fold. There would be commendations, promotions, and the deep cultural satisfaction of having extended the Dominion's reach once more. The human fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of the sensor perimeter. 62 ships, right on schedule. They held formation at a respectful distance, not advancing, showed not retreating. The Valeth sensor officers cataloged them with board efficiency. Cruisers, destroyers, frigates, support vessels. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. Jael leaned back in his throne. "Open a channel to the human fleet," he ordered. "Inform them that their diplomatic vessel has been given terms and that—" "Archon." It was Tayith. Her voice was different. Jael turned to look at her and saw something he had never seen on her face before. It was not fear, not exactly. It was confusion. Deep, genuine confusion, the kind that came from looking at something that should not exist. "What is it?" he demanded. "The sensors," Tayith said. "There is something else." Jael frowned and looked at the main display. The human fleet was there, 62 contacts holding position. Behind them, at the very edge of detection range, Ada was something else, a single contact. But the readings made no sense. The sensor display was flickering, struggling to process the data, the numbers cycling through values that were beyond the normal operating range. "Is it a malfunction?" Jael asked. "No, Archon. The sensors are functioning correctly. They are simply unable to accurately measure what they are detecting." "Explain." "The mass reading alone is—" She stopped, swallowed, started again. "The mass reading is larger than some moons in our home system. The energy output is—" "Archon, the energy signature is registering as equivalent to a small star." A cold silence fell over the bridge. Every officer turned to look at the display. The single contact was growing as it moved closer, and with each passing second, the sensor readings climbed higher. Mass, energy, non-dimensional scale. Every number was wrong. Every number was impossible. Then the FTL distortion hit. It washed over the Valeth fleet like a wave, a ripple in the fabric of space itself that made every sensor array on every ship in the formation overload simultaneously. Warning alarms screamed. Display screens cracked. 3 sensor drones at the perimeter of the fleet simply went dark, their systems fried by the sheer magnitude of the distortion. It was as if someone had thrown a stone the size of a planet into the pond of local space, and the waves were still spreading. On the dominance of will, the bridge went red. Officers shouted, systems rebooted. And through the chaos, Archon Jael gripped the arms of his throne and stared at the main viewport as something emerged from the distortion and became visible to the naked eye. The UTS Erebus Knox dropped out of FTL like a god stepping through a doorway. It was 27 kilometers long, 27 kilometers of dark, angular hull plating that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its surface was layered in adaptive nano-armor that shifted and rippled like the skin of something alive, constantly adjusting, constantly analyzing its environment. Its bow was broad and flat, like the head of a hammer, and along its flanks ran weapon batteries that stretched for kilometers, rows upon rows of turrets, launch tubes, and energy projectors that looked less like guns and more like the fingers of a clenched fist. It dwarfed the Valeth fleet, not in the way a large ship dwarfs a small one, in the way a mountain dwarfs a pebble, in the way an ocean dwarfs a puddle. The 42 Valeth warships, which had seemed so vast and imposing just moments before, now looked like scattered toys floating in the shadow of something that should not have been built by mortal hands. The human fleet reformed around the Titan like an escort. 62 warships that would have been any other civilization's greatest military achievement, reduced to an honor guard for the thing that moved between them. The bridge of the dominance of will was silent. Not the silence of confidence, the silence of creatures who had just seen the ground shift beneath their feet. "Archon," Tayeth said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "Full scan results are in." Jael did not respond. He was staring at the viewport, his mandibles frozen, his amber eyes locked on the shape that filled the sky like a new constellation. Tayeth reported anyway. "Mice 27.3 kilometers in length, mass consistent with a heavy planetoid. Power output exceeds anything in our records by a factor of 40. Hull composition, unknown alloys, at least 3 materials we have never encountered. Weapon systems. We count over 8,000 individual weapon emplacements. Shield harmonics. We cannot penetrate them with our scanners. They are operating on frequencies we do not have the technology to read." She paused. "Archon, that ship could destroy this entire fleet in a single engagement. Our models give us a survival probability of less than 2%. Jael said nothing. His hands were still on the arms of his throne. His claws had dug grooves into the metal. On the bridge of the Erebus Knox, Admiral Lena Vasquez stood at the center of a command deck that could have housed a small town. The bridge was circular, tiered, and staffed by over 300 officers working in precise, quiet coordination. Holographic displays filled the air with data, fleet positions, weapon statuses, shield readings, and a real-time tactical map that showed every Valeth ship as a small red dot surrounded by a vast blue presence. Vasquez looked at the display and felt nothing in particular. She had spent her career preparing for moments like this, and preparation had a way of burning the emotion out of things. She was not excited. She was not afraid. She was focused, the way a surgeon was focused before a difficult operation, aware of the stakes but consumed by the work. "Status of the olive branch?" she asked. "Damaged but intact, Admiral. Life signs are stable. Ambassador Okafor is alive." "Good. Status of the Valeth fleet?" "Holding position. No weapons charging. They appear to be waiting." "They are thinking," Vasquez said. "That is what I want them to do." She turned to her tactical officer. "Lieutenant Commander Reyes, execute Protocol 7 broadcast." Reyes nodded and initiated the sequence. What happened next was not a message in the traditional sense. It was a data packet, a dense, compressed bundle of technical information transmitted simultaneously to every Valeth ship in the formation. It bypassed their communication systems entirely, embedding itself directly in their sensor networks through a method that the Valeth had never encountered. It was, in effect, a forced download. The data packet contained exactly one thing: the technical specifications of the Erebus Knox. Not all of them. Not even most of them. Just enough. Weapon yields, shield capacities, power output curves, armor composition ratings, drive capabilities, crew complement. And because Admiral Vasquez believed in clarity, a simple mathematical comparison showing what would happen if every weapon on every Valeth ship in the fleet fired simultaneously at the Erebus Knox's forward shields. The answer, rendered in clean numbers that needed no translation, was nothing. On every Valeth bridge in the formation, officers stared at the data as it populated their screens. The numbers were not ambiguous. The numbers did not require interpretation. The numbers said, in the universal language of mathematics, that the thing floating in front of them was beyond anything they had ever built, ever encountered, or ever imagined. The numbers said that the Velith fleet, the pride of a 6,000-year-old civilization, was not outmatched. It was irrelevant. On the dominance of will, Sub-Archon Taeth read the data 3 times. Then she turned to the Archon. "Archon," she said, and her voice carried the careful weight of someone delivering news that could end the world. "This data is accurate. Our own sensors confirm it independently. Their specifications match what we are detecting." Giles' mandibles were clicking rapidly, a sign in Velith body language of extreme agitation. He had been an Archon for 112 years. He had commanded fleets that burned cities and broke nations. He had never, in all that time, encountered a problem that could not be solved with sufficient force. He was encountering one now. "It is a trick," he said, "a projection, a hologram. Our mass sensors do not detect holograms, Archon. That ship is real, it is there, and it is everything the data says it is." Giles stood. He stood because sitting felt like submission, and Korvath Giles did not submit. He paced the bridge, his heavy boots striking the deck plates like a heartbeat, and his officers watched him with eyes that had gone from confident to uncertain, to something very close to afraid. "We are the Velith Compact," he said, and his voice was loud now, filling the bridge with authority he was pulling from somewhere deep and desperate. "We have ruled for 6,000 years. We do not kneel. We do not retreat. We do not—" "Archon," the communications officer interrupted, and the interruption itself was so unusual that it silenced the entire bridge. "The human ship, the large one, it is transmitting." "What does it say?" The officer listened. Then he looked at Jael with an expression that the Archon could not read, because it was an expression no Velith had ever needed to make before. It was the expression of someone who had just realized that the universe was much larger than they had been told. "It says nothing, Archon. It transmits no words, no demands, no threats. It is simply broadcasting its own designation, over and over, on all frequencies." "Its designation?" "Yes, Archon, just the name. Erebus Nox." The name echoed in the silence of the bridge. The Velith did not know what it meant. They did not know that in the old languages of Earth, Erebus was the primordial darkness, the void that existed before creation. They did not know that Nox was the night itself, personified, the mother of sleep and death. They did not need to know. The ship spoke for itself. Jael stood at the center of his bridge, surrounded by his officers, his fleet, and 6,000 years of unchallenged dominance. He looked at the thing that filled his viewport, the thing that made his warships look like children's toys, and he felt something he had never felt before. He did not have a word for it. In the Velith language, there was no word for it, because no Velith had ever needed one. The closest equivalent in human language was simple, and it fit perfectly: humility. He stood there for a long time. Then he did something that no Archon in the history of the Velith Compact had ever done. He raised his hand, palm forward, and spoke to his fleet. "All ships," Archon Korvath Giles said, and his voice was quiet now, drained of its thunder. "Hold fire." The order went out. 42 warships, their weapons hot, their crews ready, received the command and obeyed. Guns that had been aimed at the olive branch swiveled away. Targeting systems went dark. Shields shifted from combat configuration to defensive posture. The Velith fleet held its breath, and the Erebus Nox waited, dark and patient and vast, like the night it was named for. It did not fire, it did not advance. It simply existed, filling the sky with the simple, overwhelming fact of what humanity could build when it decided that something needed to be built. Across the void, on the battered bridge of the olive branch, Ambassador Idris Okafor looked through his cracked viewport and saw the shape of the Titan against the stars. He did not smile. There was nothing to smile about. 3 of his crew were dead, his ship was broken, and the piece he had come to build was hanging by a thread. But the thread was still there, and as long as there was a thread, there was a chance. He straightened his shoulders, pressed his hand against his broken ribs, and waited for what came next. The shuttle that carried Archon Korvath Giles and his honor guard, from the dominance of will to the Erebus Nox, was a fine vessel by Valeth standards. It was armored, fast, and decorated with the ceremonial markings of a fleet commander. It had carried Jael to the surrender of 11 worlds. It had always felt large. Now, as it approached the Erebus Nox, it felt like a grain of sand drifting toward a cliff face. The Titan's hull filled the shuttle's viewport entirely. There was no seeing the whole of it. The ship was too large for that, too vast to comprehend from this distance. All Jael could see was surface. Kilometers of dark, shifting armor plating that rippled with faint patterns of light, like the skin of some deep ocean creature stirring in its sleep. The nano-armor was alive, or close enough to alive that the distinction did not matter. It watched them approach. Jael was certain of it. The ship was aware of the tiny vessel moving toward it the way a mountain might be aware of an ant crawling up its slope. Not threatened, not interested, simply aware. His honor guard sat behind him in the shuttle. 6 warriors, the finest in the fleet, one clad in ceremonial battle armor and carrying weapons that had been blessed by the Compact's war priests. They were the best the Valeth had to offer. They sat in rigid silence, and Jael could smell the chemical markers they were emitting. The sharp, acidic scent of fear masked by the bitter tang of forced aggression. They were terrified. They were trained well enough not to show it, but biology did not lie. Jael could not blame them. He was terrified too. The shuttle was guided into one of the Erebus Nox's hangar bays by an automated docking system that took control of their vessel without asking permission. The Valeth pilot's hands hovered uselessly over controls that no longer responded to him as the shuttle was pulled gently but firmly through a massive set of doors and deposited on a landing pad inside the ship. The hangar bay alone was larger than most space stations Jael had visited. The ceiling was so high that it disappeared into shadow. Rows of human strike fighters lined the walls. Hundreds of them, sleek and angular, resting in their cradles like sleeping predators. Service vehicles moved between them in orderly patterns, crewed by humans in gray uniforms who glanced at the Valeth shuttle with polite curiosity and nothing else. No fear, no awe, no nervousness. Just the mild interest of workers who had a job to do and a foreign visitor to accommodate. That, more than anything, unsettled Jael. He had expected a display of hostility, or at least tension. What he got was competence. Calm, quiet, professional competence. These people were not showing off. They were not trying to intimidate him. They were simply going about their business inside a machine so powerful that intimidation was beside the point. The shuttle's ramp lowered. Jael descended with his honor guard, his boots striking the deck of a human warship for the first time. The air was clean and cool, carrying a faint metallic scent that was not unpleasant. The gravity was slightly lighter than Valeth standard. These humans came from a smaller world. A reception party was waiting. 4 human soldiers in black combat armor stood at attention, their weapons holstered but visible. They were small by Valeth standards. The tallest barely reached Jael's shoulder, but they held themselves with the easy confidence of people who knew exactly where they were and what they were capable of. An officer stepped forward and saluted. "Archon Jael," the officer said through a translation device clipped to her collar. "Welcome aboard the UTS Erebus Nox. Admiral Vasquez and Ambassador Okafor are waiting for you in the diplomatic chamber, if you will follow me." Jael nodded. It was not a gesture his species used naturally, but he had studied enough of the human transmissions to recognize it. He followed the officer, and his honor guard followed him, and together they walked into the belly of the Titan. The walk was long. Jael suspected this was intentional. They passed through corridors wide enough to drive vehicles through. They passed weapon bays where massive turrets sat in their housings, dormant but ready, their barrels thick enough for a Valeth soldier to stand inside. They passed through a section where the walls were transparent, and revealing the interior of a hangar so large it held not just fighters, but full-sized warships. Human destroyers, docked inside the Erebus Nox like lifeboats inside a cruise liner. Jael counted 6 before they turned a corner and lost sight of the hangar. 6 warships, any one of which could have challenged a Valeth cruiser, carried as cargo. They passed the central reactor section, and here Jael stopped despite himself. The corridor opened onto a viewing gallery that looked down into the heart of the ship. And what he saw there, made his breath catch in a way that no battlefield ever had. The reactor was a sphere of contained energy, easily a kilometer across, suspended in a lattice of magnetic containment fields that hummed with a frequency Jael could feel in his bones. It pulsed with a blue-white light that was not quite steady, not quite rhythmic. It moved like a heartbeat, or like breathing, or like something dreaming. The energy readings his implants were picking up were beyond anything the Valeth had achieved in 6,000 years of research. "This way, Archon," the officer said politely, and Jael realized he had been standing still for nearly a minute, staring. He moved on, but the image of that reactor stayed in his mind, burning like an afterimage behind his eyes. His people had built great things. They had raised empires, conquered worlds, and bent the laws of physics to serve their will. But they had never built anything like that. They had never even imagined anything like that. The diplomatic chamber was at the center of the ship, deep within its most protected section. It was a large circular room with a high ceiling and soft, indirect lighting that cast no harsh shadows. The floor was polished to a mirror shine. At the center of the room was a table, simple, rectangular, made of dark wood. Real wood, Jael noted, from a tree, an organic material shaped by hand, placed at the heart of the most advanced war machine in the galaxy. He did not know what to make of that. Admiral Lena Vasquez stood on one side of the table. She was smaller than Jael had expected, compact, lean, with short dark hair, and eyes that assessed him with the clinical precision of someone measuring a potential threat. She wore a simple uniform, no ceremonial armor, no decorations beyond a handful of rank insignia. She did not need decorations. She was standing inside her decoration. Vasquez nodded to him. "Archon Jael." "Admiral," Jael replied. His voice was steady, but he was working hard to keep it that way. "You have an impressive vessel." "Thank you," Vasquez said, with exactly no emotion. "Please sit." There were chairs on both sides of the table, human-sized on one side, larger versions on the other, clearly prepared for Valeth proportions. Jael noted the consideration. He also noted that the larger chairs placed the Valeth delegates at exactly the same eye level as the humans. Not higher, not lower, equal. Another message. He sat. His honor guard arranged themselves behind him, standing at attention. Vasquez's soldiers did the same on her side. The two groups eyed each other across the table with the mutual wariness of professionals who recognized other professionals. Then a door opened on the far side of the chamber, and Ambassador Idris Okafor walked in. Jael had not expected this. He had assumed the human diplomat was still on the broken ship, tending to his wounds and his dead. But here he was, crossing the chamber with slow, careful steps that spoke of pain being deliberately ignored. His face was bruised. A white bandage covered the cut above his left eye. His left arm was held against his body in a way that suggested the ribs beneath it were cracked or broken. He was wearing the same clothes he had been wearing during their first conversation, torn, stained, and marked with the unmistakable brown of dried blood. He had not changed. He had not cleaned up. He had come exactly as he was, wounded, bloodied, and unbowed. Okafor reached the table and sat down across from Jael. He arranged his hands on the wooden surface, looked the Archon directly in the eye, and said, "Archon Jael, I thank you for accepting our invitation to continue talks." Jael stared at him. The human's voice was the same as before, calm, warm, steady, as if nothing had happened, as if the attack on his ship, the death of his crew, and the arrival of the most terrifying weapon in the galaxy had not changed anything fundamental about what he was here to do. "You are injured," Jael said, because it was the only thing he could think to say. "I am," Okafor agreed. "3 of my crew members are dead. Your ship killed them." The words hung in the air. They were not an accusation, not exactly. They were a fact, delivered with the same calm precision as everything else Okafor said. But they landed heavily. Even Jael, who had ordered the deaths of millions, felt their weight. "I regret the necessity," Jael said. Soran was surprised to find that some small part of him meant it. "There was no necessity," Okafor said simply, "but we can discuss that later. For now, I would like to resume our conversation from where it was interrupted." He reached into his coat and produced a small data tablet. He placed it on the table between them and activated it. A document appeared on the screen. Text in both human and Valeth script, side by side. "These are the terms I proposed to you aboard the Olive Branch," Okafor said. "Before the attack, I would like to present them again." Jael looked at the document. His implants translated the text as his eyes moved across it. Mutual non-aggression, defined borders with a neutral zone between human and Valeth space, trade agreements with initial focus on non-strategic goods, cultural exchange programs, the voluntary and reciprocal, a joint scientific commission to explore areas of shared interest, conflict resolution through dialogue, with agreed-upon procedures for addressing disputes. He read it twice. Then he looked at Okafor. "These are the same terms," he said. "Yes, exactly the same." Word for word. Jael's mandibles clicked. He looked at the document again, then at Okafor, then at Admiral Vasquez, who stood behind the ambassador like a shadow made of patience and steel. "I do not understand," Jael said, and the admission cost him more than he would ever admit to anyone. "You bring this." He gestured broadly, encompassing not just the room but the ship, the fleet, the impossible weapon that surrounded them. "You bring all of this. And then you offer me the same terms you offered when you had nothing?" "We did not have nothing before," Okafor said. "We had the same thing we have now, a desire for peace. The ship around us did not change what we want. It only changes whether you believe we mean it." Jael leaned back in his oversized chair. In 6,000 years, the Valeth had perfected the art of negotiation through strength. The stronger party dictated terms. The weaker party accepted them. This was clean, efficient, and natural. But the humans were doing something he had never encountered. They were the stronger party, overwhelmingly, absurdly, impossibly the stronger party, and they were offering terms that a weaker party would offer, terms of equality, terms that gave away the very advantage they held. "Why?" he asked. It was a simple question, but it contained everything. Okafor studied him for a moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was quiet, as if he was sharing something personal. "Archon, I have spent my life talking to people who believed that power gave them the right to take what they wanted. Some of those people were from my own species. Humans have not always been good to each other. We have fought wars that killed billions. We have committed acts of cruelty that we will never fully make up for. We know what it means to use strength as a weapon against the weak because we have done it ourselves. Many times." He paused, letting that settle. "We built the Erebus Nox because we understood something about ourselves, that we are capable of terrible things when we are afraid or angry, or when we convince ourselves that our strength makes us right. This ship was not built for you. It was built as a reminder to us, a reminder of what we could become if we ever stopped choosing to be better." He met Jael's eyes. "I am offering you these terms because they are right. Not because we are weak, not because we are afraid of you, but because peace between equals is the only kind of peace that lasts. I have seen what happens when one side dominates the other. It does not end. It festers. It breeds resentment, rebellion, and eventually war. I do not want that for your people or for mine." He gestured at the bandage on his face, the blood on his clothes. 3 of my crew died today because your civilization believes that strength is the only thing that matters. I am sitting across from you, in pain, in a ship that could turn your entire fleet into vapor, and I am telling you that strength is not the only thing that matters. I am offering you something your people have never been offered before, the chance to be something other than conquerors, the chance to meet someone as an equal." The room was silent. Even the guards on both sides had stopped their quiet, professional breathing and gone still. Jael sat with those words for a long time. He was not accustomed to processing ideas that did not fit the framework he had lived inside for his entire life. The Valeth worldview was simple. The strong ruled, the weak served. It was elegant in its clarity. It had worked for 6,000 years. But sitting in this room, in this impossible ship, across from a wounded man who was offering him kindness backed by the power to destroy him, Jael felt the framework crack. Not break, not shatter. Or just crack. A thin line running through a wall he had thought was indestructible. He turned to Taeth. She was standing behind him with the honor guard, and her expression was carefully neutral, but her eyes were bright with something that might have been hope. She had always been the soft one, the one who questioned the old ways quietly, in private, where no one could hear. Now she was watching her Archon sit across from an alien who was saying things she had never dared to say herself, and she was waiting to see what he would do. "Taith," Jael said, "your assessment." She stepped forward. "The terms are generous, Archon, more generous than anything we would offer in their position. The military analysis is clear. Their ship is beyond our capability to match. Refusing these terms would mean conflict. And conflict would mean destruction. But beyond the military reality," she paused, choosing her words with care, "these terms offer the compact something it has not had in 6,000 years. A relationship with another species that is not built on subjugation. I believe this is worth exploring." Jael grunted. He turned back to Okafor. "Your peace," he said. "If I accept it, what guarantees do I have?" "The same guarantees I have," Okafor said. "Your word and mine, backed by the understanding that breaking them would be costly for both of us. And if the compact chooses to expand into space that is not yours, other regions, other species, then those are decisions for the compact to make. And they are not part of this agreement. We are defining the relationship between humanity and the Valeth. Nothing more, and nothing less." Jael considered this. The human was not trying to reform the compact. He was not demanding that the Valeth change their ways or abandon their empire. He was simply drawing a line and saying, "On this side, we are equals. What you do on your side is your business." It was, Jael realized, the most pragmatic offer he had ever received. And it was, against every instinct in his ancient warrior's body, reasonable. He looked at the data tablet. He looked at the terms. He looked at the wounded human sitting across from him with steady hands and calm eyes, and the weight of a civilization's hope on his broken shoulders. Then Taith leaned close and spoke quietly in his ear. "Archon, long-range sensors have detected 4 additional FTL signatures converging on our position. Same magnitude as this vessel." Jael's blood went cold. Four more. 4 more ships like this one? The thought was beyond comprehension. 1 was enough to end his fleet. 5 was enough to end the compact itself. He did not know, could not know, that the signatures were decoys. Ghost echoes projected by Admiral Vasquez's electronic warfare systems, designed to create exactly this moment. The Erebus Nox was one of a kind. There were no others. But the sensor data was perfect, and the Valeth had no way to tell the difference. Jael looked at the terms one more time. Then he reached for the data tablet. "I accept," he said. The words were simple, 2 words, but they were the first time in the 6,000-year history of the Valeth Compact that an Archon had accepted terms from another species as an equal. The first time a Valeth leader had signed an agreement that did not begin with the words submit. The first time the Dominion had drawn a border and agreed to stay behind it. Jael pressed his mark into the tablet. Okafor added his signature beside it. The document was witnessed by Vasquez, Taith, and the officers of both sides. It was done. The ceremony, if it could be called that, was brief. There were no celebrations, no speeches, no toasts. The weight of the moment was too heavy for festivity. 3 humans were dead. A civilization's entire worldview had been challenged. The peace was fragile, uncertain, and built on a foundation of mutual recognition that could crack at any moment. But it was there. It existed. 2 species, separated by thousands of light years and thousands of years of different history, had looked at each other across a table and decided to try something that neither of them was sure would work. As the Valeth delegation prepared to leave, Jael paused at the door of the diplomatic chamber. He turned back to Okafor. "Ambassador," he said, "I have conquered worlds. I have broken fleets and ended civilizations. I have done things that your people would call monstrous, and I have never lost a moment's sleep over any of them." He paused. "But I will remember this day, and I will think about what you said, about strength and what it is for." Okafor inclined his head. "That is all I ask, Archon." Jael left. His honor guard followed. The door closed behind them. In the silence that followed, Admiral Vasquez moved to stand beside Okafor at the viewport. Through the reinforced glass, when they could see the Valeth shuttle departing, a tiny spark of light moving back toward the dark shapes of the alien fleet. "Do you think it will hold?" Vasquez asked. Okafor watched the shuttle disappear into the distance. He pressed his hand against his broken ribs and let out a slow, careful breath. "It does not matter if they believe in peace," he said. "It matters that they believe in the Erebus Nox." Vasquez looked at him. For the first time since he had known her, something that might have been a smile touched the corner of her mouth. "That," she said, "is the most honest thing a diplomat has ever said." They stood together and watched the Valeth fleet begin, slowly and carefully, to withdraw. 6 months passed. In the scale of civilizations, 6 months was nothing. A blink, a breath, ere a single tick of a clock that measured time in centuries. But for the two species that had met at the edge of the Cygnus Reach and decided not to destroy each other, 6 months was enough to begin changing everything. The Valeth Compact honored the accord. This surprised many people on the human side, including several members of the UTC High Council who had privately wagered that the agreement would collapse within weeks. It did not collapse. The border was established. The neutral zone was defined. Trade convoys began making cautious runs between human and Valeth space, carrying non-strategic goods, raw materials, agricultural products, cultural items. Nothing dangerous. Nothing that either side would miss if the relationship fell apart. But the convoys ran on schedule, and they ran without incident. In every successful trip was a small brick laid in the foundation of something that might, with time and patience, become real trust. Ambassador Idris Okafor oversaw the process from the newly established human diplomatic station at the edge of the neutral zone. His ribs had healed, though they still ached on cold mornings. The cut above his eye had left a thin scar that he chose not to have removed. He wanted to remember how it got there. He wanted everyone who looked at him to remember. The 3 crew members who had died on the Olive Branch, Ensign Torres, Dr. Habib, and Petty Officer Kwame, were given full honors by the UTC. Their names were etched into the memorial wall at Geneva, alongside every human who had ever died in the service of exploration and peace. Okafor attended the ceremony. He stood in the front row, and in his best suit, and did not cry. He saved that for later, alone in his quarters where no one could see. A diplomat could show many things in public, but grief, real grief, was private. Admiral Lena Vasquez returned the Erebus Nox to its hidden berth, the hollowed-out moon in an unnamed system that appeared on no chart. The Titan powered down, its systems going dormant one by one, its vast corridors falling silent, its reactor cooling from the brightness of a small star to the faint pulse of a sleeping heart. It would wait there, in the dark, until it was needed again. Vasquez hoped it never would be. She suspected it would be. She returned to active duty with the 4th Expeditionary Fleet and was quietly promoted to Fleet Admiral, a rank that had not existed before and was created specifically for her. The promotion came with a new responsibility: oversight of all humanity's Titan-class assets. The fact that there was only one Titan-class asset was classified above the level of most government officials. As far as the galaxy was concerned, humanity had an unknown number of the ships, and the UTC was happy to let that ambiguity do its work. The first Valeth civilians arrived in human space 4 months after the accord. They were scholars, 3 of them, assigned by the Compact to study humanity as part of the cultural exchange program. They arrived at the human colony of New Geneva aboard a Valeth courier vessel, flanked by 2 Valeth warships that lurked at the edge of the system like nervous parents watching their children enter a stranger's house. The scholars were cautious, formal, and visibly uncomfortable. They had been raised in a civilization that divided the universe into 2 categories: the Valeth and everyone beneath the Valeth, and now they were being asked to treat a species they had been taught to consider inferior as something approaching equals. It was, for them, like being asked to take a fish's opinion seriously. Their training said one thing, the accord said another, and the memory of the Erebus Nox, which hung over every interaction like a vast and silent shadow, said something else entirely. The lead scholar was a female named Cathara Voss. She was old by Valeth standards, nearly 500 years, and had the sharp, impatient mind of someone who had spent centuries cataloging the galaxy's species and filing them into neat categories of superiority and inferiority. Humanity did not fit her categories. This bothered her enormously. They are chaotic, she reported back to the compact after her first month of observation. Their social structures are fragmented. They argue constantly. They have hundreds of languages, thousands of cultural traditions, and no unified belief system. Their governments disagree with each other on fundamental principles. Their history is a catalog of war, famine, cruelty, and self-inflicted catastrophe. By every metric the compact uses to evaluate species potential, they should have destroyed themselves centuries ago. She paused in her report, and when she continued, her voice carried the bewildered frustration of a scientist whose data refused to support her hypothesis. And yet they built the Erebus Nox. They built a machine that exceeds anything we have created in 6,000 years of focused, a unified effort. They built it while arguing with each other, while fighting each other, while being by every objective measure a complete mess. I do not understand how this is possible. I do not understand these creatures at all. Her report was read by many officials in the Valeth Compact, including Sub-Archon Tayeth, who had been appointed as the Compact's first ambassador to humanity. Tayeth read the report, smiled slightly, and filed it alongside her own growing collection of observations about the strange, contradictory, infuriating, and oddly admirable species that the Compact had stumbled upon. Tayeth had moved to the neutral zone diplomatic station, where she worked across the corridor from Ambassador Okafor. Their relationship was professional, careful, and marked by the slow, uncertain process of two people from vastly different worlds trying to find common ground. Okafor was patient with her. He had been patient with warlords. An alien diplomat was comparatively easy. They had dinner together once a week, a practice Okafor had suggested as an informal way to build rapport. The meals were awkward at first. Valeth food was largely protein-based and served raw, while human food was cooked, seasoned, and varied in ways that bewildered Valeth digestion. They settled on a compromise. Each week, one of them chose the menu, and the other ate whatever was served without complaint. It was, Okafor reflected, a reasonable metaphor for the entire diplomatic relationship. During one of these dinners, 3 months into her posting, Tayeth asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the day she had stood on the bridge of the dominance of will and watched the Erebus Nox emerge from folded space. "Ambassador," she said, setting down her utensil, a two-pronged tool that she used with the delicate precision of a surgeon, "I must ask you something. It is a question that the entire compact is asking, and no one has been willing to put it into words." Okafor looked up from his meal. "Of course. The Erebus Nox," Tayeth said. "You built it before you knew we existed, before you knew any alien civilization existed. Your species had never made contact with another intelligent race when construction of that vessel began." She paused. "Who was it for?" Okafor set down his fork. He looked at Tayeth for a long moment, and when she saw something in his eyes that she had not expected. Not pride, not shame, but a deep and complicated sadness. "That is not a question for me," he said. "That is a question for Admiral Vasquez." Tayeth asked Vasquez the same question the following week during a strategic review meeting at the diplomatic station. Vasquez was not a woman who wasted words, and she did not waste them now. "Ourselves," Vasquez said. Tayeth blinked. "I do not understand." "The Erebus Nox was built as a deterrent," Vasquez said. "Not against aliens, against us, against humanity. We built it because we looked at our own history and saw what we were capable of when we turned on each other. We built it because we needed something so overwhelming, so absolute, even that no faction within our civilization would ever believe it could win a war against the others. We built it to make human-on-human war impossible by making the consequences unthinkable." She met Tayeth's eyes. "You asked who it was for. It was for the worst version of ourselves, the version that we are always afraid might come back." Tayeth returned to her quarters that evening and did not sleep for 3 days. She had spent her entire career studying lesser species, cataloging their weaknesses, their failures, their inevitable submission to Valeth superiority. She had never encountered a species that frightened her, The Valeth were the apex. That was simply how it was. But now she understood something that Archangel had understood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at a ship too large to comprehend. Humanity was not frightening because of what they could build. They were frightening because of why they built it. A species that looked at its own capacity for destruction and said we need to build a weapon against ourselves was a species that understood violence at a level the Valeth had never reached. The Valeth used violence as a tool, applied outward against the weak. Humans carried violence inside them like a disease they had learned to manage but never cured, and the Erebus Nox was the medicine. Not gentle, not kind, but effective. A species like that could not be conquered, not because they were too strong, though they were, but because they had already fought the worst enemy they would ever face, and that enemy was themselves, and they were still standing. The intelligence Taeth shared about the wider galaxy changed everything for the UTC High Council. The galaxy, it turned out, was not empty. It was full of civilizations, empires, alliances, and rivalries that stretched back millions of years. The Valeth Compact, for all its 6,000-year history, was a regional power at best, dominant in its corner of the galaxy, but unknown or irrelevant in others. There were older empires, larger federations, and species so advanced that even the Valeth spoke of them in whispers. And there was a pattern, a single repeating pattern that ran through the history of every civilization the Valeth had encountered or heard rumors of. The strong dominated the weak. Empires rose and fell. Species were conquered, enslaved, absorbed, or destroyed. The galaxy operated on a principle as old as life itself. Power determined everything, and mercy was a luxury that no one could afford. Humanity had entered a galaxy that ran on fear. Every civilization either held the whip or felt it. There was no middle ground. There was no third option. Until now. The UTC High Council convened an emergency session in Geneva to determine humanity's path forward. The session lasted 9 days and became, by all accounts, one of the most heated debates in the history of human governance. The Hawks spoke first. They wanted to build more Titans. They wanted to expand aggressively, claim territory, and establish humanity as a dominant power before someone else decided to test them. The galaxy was dangerous, they argued. The Valeth had been a warning. The next species might not be willing to talk. The only way to survive in a galaxy built on fear was to be the thing that everyone else was afraid of. The Doves spoke next. They wanted to dismantle the Erebus Nox. They argued that the weapon was a moral abomination, a monument to humanity's worst instincts, and that carrying it into the galaxy would make humanity no better than the Valeth or any other conquering empire. The only way to change the galaxy's pattern was to break it, to show that a species could be powerful without being a predator. Disarm, they said. Lead by example. Trust the galaxy to follow. The debate raged back and forth, growing louder and angrier with each day. The Hawks accused the Doves of naivety. The Doves accused the Hawks of warmongering. Old political rivalries surfaced. Historical grievances were dredged up. The Council, which was supposed to represent the unified voice of humanity, sounded like exactly what it was. A room full of people who could not agree on what to have for lunch, let alone how to navigate the most dangerous environment their species had ever encountered. On the 8th day, Ambassador Idris Okafor asked to address the council. He stood at the podium in the Great Hall, a tall, thin man with a scar above his eye, and a calm voice that could fill a room without ever rising above conversational volume. He looked at the council members, the observers, the cameras broadcasting to every human world, and he spoke. "I have listened to 9 days of debate," he said, "and I have heard 2 proposals. The first says we should become the biggest predator in the jungle. Which the second says we should put down our weapons and hope the other predators become vegetarians. With respect to my colleagues on both sides, I believe both proposals are wrong." He paused, letting the silence do its work. "The Hawks are right that the galaxy is dangerous. It is. The Valeth taught us that, and the intelligence they have shared confirms it. We cannot survive by being weak. Any species that disarms in a galaxy built on force will not survive long enough to prove a point." He turned to the other side of the chamber. "The Doves are right that power without principle is just tyranny with better technology. If we build 100 Titans and use them to conquer, we become exactly what we found at the Cygnus Reach. An empire of fear, ruling through violence, breeding the resentment that will eventually tear us apart. Moya, we have done this before, in our own history. It never ends well. He placed his hands on the podium and leaned forward. I am proposing a third path. We keep the Erebus Nox. We maintain our strength. We build whatever we need to build to ensure that no one in this galaxy can threaten humanity's survival. But we do not use that strength to conquer. We do not use it to dominate. We use it to create space. Space for conversation, for negotiation, for the possibility that two species can meet each other and choose something other than war. His voice grew quieter, more personal, and the chamber leaned in to hear him. I stood on the bridge of a broken ship with 3 dead crew members and offered peace to a species that had spent 6,000 years crushing everyone they met. I did not offer that peace because I am naive. I offered it because I was standing behind the biggest gun in the galaxy, and I knew that if we could not offer peace from that position, we would never offer it at all. He straightened. Humanity will always extend its hand first, but behind every open hand stands a closed fist. We do not conquer. We do not submit. We offer peace, and we make the cost of refusing it unthinkable. That is what I am proposing. That is who I believe we should be. The chamber was quiet for a long time after he finished. Then the vote was called. The proposal passed unanimously, not because everyone agreed with every word, but because every person in that room understood, on some level too deep for politics, that Okafor had described the only version of humanity that could survive the galaxy without losing its soul. It became known as the Okafor Doctrine. Word spread, not quickly, because the galaxy was large and news traveled at the speed of ships and signals, but it spread. The Valith Compact shared it first, not out of generosity, but out of bewildered fascination. A species that could have demanded anything and chose to demand nothing was a novelty worth discussing. Other species heard about it through trade networks, intelligence channels, and the slow, organic process of galactic gossip. And something unexpected happened. Species that had been conquered by the Valith, or by other empires, or that had been hiding in the margins of the galaxy hoping not to be noticed, began reaching out to humanity, quietly, carefully, through back channels and encrypted transmissions and couriers that traveled circuitous routes to avoid detection. And they did not reach out because humanity was the strongest. There were older powers in the galaxy, larger empires, more advanced technologies. They reached out because humanity was the first powerful species they had ever encountered that had offered a hand instead of a chain. The first species that had said, "You do not have to kneel." The first species that had used the word equal and meant it. The messages came from dozens of worlds. Some were desperate, pleas for help from species on the brink of extinction. Some were cautious, diplomatic feelers from civilizations that wanted to verify that the rumors were true. Some were simply curious. A species out there had apparently done the impossible, and they wanted to know how. Okafor read every message personally. He responded to each one. And with every response, the network grew. Not an empire, not an alliance, not yet, but the beginning of something that the galaxy had never seen. A web of relationships built not on dominance, but on the radical, terrifying, absurd idea that different species could choose to treat each other as equals. It was slow, it was fragile, it was, by the standards of galactic politics, insane. But it was growing. And then, on a quiet morning, 6 months and 13 days after the Cygnus Accords were signed, the listening post at the edge of human space detected something new. It was not like the Valith signal. The Valith signal had been a territorial marker, loud, aggressive, and confident. This signal was different. It was faint, buried deep in a frequency band that human technology could barely detect. It was old. Not 2,000 years old. Like the Valith broadcast, but old in a way that made the linguists and physicists who analyzed it go very quiet and look at each other with wide eyes. The signal was millions of years old, possibly older. It had been traveling across the galaxy for so long that it had been stretched and distorted by the expansion of space itself. Decoding it took weeks of work by the best minds humanity had. When the translation was complete, it was delivered to Ambassador Okafor and Admiral Vasquez simultaneously in sealed files marked with the highest classification the UTC possessed. Okafor opened his file in his office at the diplomatic station. He read the translation. He read it again. Then he sat very still and stared at the wall for a long time. The message was a distress call. Not from a ship, not from a planet. So from an entire civilization. A civilization so old and so advanced that the Valeth Compact's 6,000-year history would have been a footnote in their records. They had been a great power once, perhaps the greatest the galaxy had ever known. They had ruled not through force but through knowledge, through the slow accumulation of understanding that came from watching the universe for millions of years. And they had sent this message because they were afraid. The translation was imperfect. The language was ancient and strange, built on concepts that human minds struggle to hold. But the core meaning was clear, brutally, terrifyingly clear. They are returning. We could not stop them. We could not run far enough. They consume everything. They are patient. They sleep between the stars and wake when civilizations grow bright enough to notice. We were bright. They noticed. Arm yourselves. Arm everyone. It will not be enough, but it is all that is left. Okafor closed the file. He pressed his hands flat on his desk and breathed slowly. The way he breathed when the weight of the world was pressing down and the only choice was to hold it up or be crushed. Then he reached for his comm. Across human space, in a system that appeared on no chart, aboard a ship that was sleeping in the dark inside a hollowed-out moon. Admiral Lena Vasquez opened her file and read the same translation. She read it once. She did not need to read it again. Her comm chimed. Okafor's voice came through, calm and steady as always, but with an edge beneath it that she had only heard once before, on the day the olive branch was hit. "Admiral," he said, "I think we need to talk." "I agree," Vasquez said. She was already walking toward the command center, her boots echoing in the empty corridors of the moon base. Around her, dormant systems were beginning to hum as her authorization codes brought them online one by one. "I will contact the Valeth," Okafor said, "and every other species that has reached out to us. If this message is real, this is not a problem for humanity alone." "Agreed," Vasquez said. "I will start on our end." She reached the command center and placed her hand on the activation panel. Deep beneath her feet, in the heart of the moon, something vast began to stir. Power systems engaged. Reactor cores brightened. 27 kilometers of dormant Warship began to wake, its systems cycling from sleep to standby to active with the slow, inevitable momentum of a tide coming in. "Ambassador," Vasquez said, "one more thing." "Yes?" "The Okafor Doctrine. Extend the hand first. Make the cost of refusing it unthinkable." She paused. "I think we are about to find out if it works on a galactic scale." Okafor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It has to, Admiral, because if it does not, I do not think there is a scale large enough for what comes next." The comm went silent. Okafor began making calls. Vasquez began giving orders. And in the dark between the stars, the Erebus Nox opened its eyes. The hand was extended. The fist was closed. And humanity, messy and fractured and brave and foolish, we walked forward into a galaxy that was about to need them more than anyone had ever imagined. The night was old. The darkness was deep. And somewhere, far away, something was waking up. But so were they.